Welcome, Nick and Melissa, to Producers Producing. I appreciate you both hopping on today. So, for a little bit of context, I had the awesome pleasure of working with both of you at Iron Galaxy. Now you've gone on to different and new and unique adventures. And so, wanted to catch up. Some of this is always selfish, right? Like, it's awesome to talk to amazing producers. I get to catch up with you, and then learn a little bit more about who you are, where you're at now, what got you into production, and that kind of fun stuff. So yeah, with that, I will just turn it over. I will pick Melissa to go first, and then just talk a little bit about who you are, where you're at, and what got you into production. And again, just a natural, normal, fun conversation.
Yeah. Hi, Ryan. Hi, Nick. Yeah, I'm Melissa. I am the lead producer at Lightforge Games. We are currently working on Project Orcs, which stands for Online Roleplay and Collaborative Storytelling.
Cool.
And the hope there is really to make a new subgenre of RPGs that takes a lot of the traditional vocal and improvisational elements of tabletop games and bringing them into digital spaces.
Neat.
So that's what I'm doing and where I'm at now. But I would say what got me into games growing up, I was the person that, installed their family's first PC, and I was eating lunch usually in like the art room, and I would take point on a lot of group projects. And so
Right.
all the pieces of being a producer, and particularly my specific group paths were there, but I didn't know that there was a career that could fit all those interests together.
Yep.
And so following just like the first thread that I had of like, okay, I like computers and I like art, um, maybe an undergrad degree in animation fits me. And I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say I'm the best animator at it. We get to work with fantastic animators that went through the same program, but that was not me. But in
Yeah.
my last semester in school, right before graduation, I took an intro to game design class, and I had finished Journey for like the 20th time, and it all just kind of like clicked. So I went back to school to study games, thinking that I would be a game animator, but I took my first production class and just, big brain moment, and it all just kind of, I felt like I finally found the career for me.
Right. That's awesome. Nick, how about
Oh,
yourself?
hello.
Yeah. Tell a little bit about who you are and how you got into this kind of wild world of gaming.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Nick Pham. And kind of like similar to Melissa, I grew up playing games like Carmen San Diego, like all of like Civilization 2, all of the joys of PC gaming back in the day. Um, and at some point, I think going through high school, I realized, is it possible to have a job in games? If so, what would I do? I think for a long time, I thought about art, realized I'm not a great artist. And so I switched over to like doing design work. And so that was kind of my major pathway. And then when I got into college, there wasn't necessarily a game program at the time. And so I did digital media. And
Hmm.
eventually, within that, there became a small game program that I was able to take towards the end. And by that time, they had started up a graduate program at the University of Central Florida called FIA. And that's where I ended up going to get my graduate degree in that program of learning how to do games. And they had a design/production track, and
Right.
so that was like really the only entryway to do like design work. And I was like, I'm not sure what production is, but I'm sure we'll find out. And so I kind of went through that program. The designers ended up being kind of like the de facto producers
Okay.
of kind of organizing things, and so that's kind of where I ended up doing that. And it wasn't my primary focus, but that was the thing that I could do. And so
Okay.
I think that like it was what I did on the side of designing. And then I think as I got my job at Iron Galaxy, they weren't in need of designers, but they were in need of a producer. And so that's kind of where I slotted in there, utilizing the skills I had grown and developed
That's
over
cool.
my education and spending some time in educational games. That's where I kind of utilized those skills to jump more into production
Yeah.
and grow my skills from there.
Yeah. That's
Oh my,
awesome.
can you imagine if Iron Galaxy needed a designer instead of a producer? We're talking a different Nick.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's
Would
a
be very
whole other
different, yeah.
beast. Yep.
I will say that I haven't looked back since. It's been great, a great journey being a producer,
Uh,
and I think I like looking back. I do enjoy it more than design work.
I'm curious. You both went to school. Like Nick, you said you focused. You did a design production track, and then got into production. Melissa, you went to school for animation, and then you went back to school for production,
Game
or
design.
was it okay? Game design. Was there an emphasis in production, or was it all game design with a tad? I'm always curious on like what the educational pathways are nowadays. Um, so I didn't,
Yeah.
I was just curious.
My program had engineering, art, and design tracks. And while they offered production classes, there wasn't like a specialty in production.
Okay,
But production was needed, and like in every single group project that we had every quarter, you had, a board game, a flash game, a tiny 3D game, and then your really big capstone group project. And so there had to be some lessons in production and how to organize things together. And so there was a little bit, but there was no track that focused on it solely.
right. It was mostly like, here's Excel. Good luck.
Yeah.
Try and figure out how to wrangle all these pieces and all that. Now that's awesome. And then so when we first worked together was at Iron Galaxy, you were already obviously a producer there. So Melissa, where was your first production gig? Or did you do animation in or any art in gaming and then kind of
Oh my
move
God.
into, or was it
Just
all
in school.
just in
Thank
school?
goodness. Yeah,
Do you,
just in school.
do you keep up with it at all?
Not 3D animation. I think there's like this piece of art behind me, something I got to do, or I feel like hand-based arts as of late have been where I've gotten to put that creative outlet. But
Right.
yeah, I don't think you're gonna find me, on a 30-second, a day video trying to animate something. But yeah, my first gig was actually at as an internship working for, oh my gosh, for Revolver in Vancouver.
Okay.
And I got to do that at the tail end of school. And then there was this thing with converting student visas into work visas that was really difficult. And so I had to leave Canada
Oh, wow.
and come back to the States. And my first job here was as an associate producer at High Voltage Studios,
Oh
just
yeah,
out
that's
west in
right.
Arlington
That's right.
Heights.
Yeah, I've,
Yeah,
I've, we're both alums of High Voltage, so
I didn't know that. Oh, that's
yeah,
I did.
yeah.
I did know that. And so
It's
my
been a
first
while, so
game,
yeah.
it has been a while. My first game there was working on Mortal Kombat X and porting it from the at the time PS4, which is what it was developed for both the previous gen consoles and PC.
Okay,
It was back porting
awesome. And then from High Voltage, you made your way to Iron Galaxy, or was there a stop on the way?
straight to Iron Galaxy.
Awesome, that's wild. I had forgotten that we had both worked at High Voltage. I feel like if you've worked in Chicagoland for a while, you've probably taken a tour of High Voltage or maybe Midway, or if you're like me, you worked at all of them and you take a tour of all Chicago game dev studios. I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing, but it just is what it is. So
It's just a small world. Yeah.
it is a totally small world, especially in Chicago. I mean, it's a very small kind of tight knit game dev scene. I personally don't like get out and about as much within the game dev community as I wish I did. Maybe I'll change that this year, but it is very small and kind of tight knit. Like once you know a couple people, all of a sudden it's like everybody, and it's kind of wild like that. But yeah, so moving back to Iron Galaxy, I think one of the things that you both obviously share is that you worked at Iron Galaxy and now you're working at new studios, and so I'm really curious on what what that transition was like. And there's all sorts of different aspects, right? At Iron Galaxy, we were all working on a lot of work for hire projects with different kind of partners. So I'm going to imagine there's difference in your stakeholders, difference in how your projects are managed and your expectations and all that. So it's an open-ended kind of question of like, what have you found to be very similar, and what have you found to be kind of like a new challenge that has maybe like stretched you in your growth as a producer between Iron Galaxy and where you're at now?
I would say that I think that so I'm at Red Storm Entertainment now,
Hmm.
and I would say that I think my experience in working at Iron Galaxy helped prepare me for this job that
Yeah.
I'm at now. Um, like you said, Iron Galaxy is primarily a uh, co-dev developer, and I think working at Red Storm, the shoe is on the other foot, where we are like the main like developer, and then we sometimes engage with other developers or external developers to come in and help us
Right.
co-dev on specific parts. I think like with Red Storm being a member of the Ubisoft family, part of that company, I think we tend to more co-dev with other studios within Ubisoft than we do with external developers. So that I think that is a major change.
Yeah.
I think.
Have you found that in terms of managing stakeholders, how has that been for you? Because I know a lot of the projects that you worked on, you'd have um, a variety of relationships, right? Um, what are those relationships, and kind of what does that management look like now? Is there a big difference in what you were doing before, or does it feel kind of very similar?
I think there is like both similarities and differences. I think right now, like we have our directors, like the
Mhm.
directors that sit on like top of the project leadership, and so my job is to help manage upwards and
Okay.
to help like kind of manage their expectations, similar to like a lot of things that we did at Iron Galaxy,
Yeah.
and managing our own set of directors, but sometimes needing to also work with our external clients and their directors and helping to keep them in the loop. So I think that part is like pretty similar
Yeah.
in terms of like just being in the room with them, advising them on risk, working out mitigation strategies and whatnot. I think there is probably an added level where we have more direct access to our essentially our publisher, which is like
Mhm.
the main Ubisoft company, and they
Okay.
have their own representatives that function as kind of like that publishing core, and so like they have their own folks that both work with us as advocates to help guide us throughout the game dev process, and also stakeholders there that we need to report to,
Okay.
on like game performance, checking in like how things are doing, key decision moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that part is like it's a little more. That is the difference between what I experienced at Iron Galaxy versus now. I think
Right.
for me.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. How big is your team, and how do you find kind of managing that team, like in terms of how you manage projects at Iron Galaxy to how you manage projects now? Like, in terms of like, you using Scrum, or you doing, stands? What kind of like practices and all of that do you have now that may or may not be kind of similar to what you used before?
Yeah, I think that there's this team is significantly larger than I think the previous teams I worked with at Iron Galaxy. I think
Okay.
like the largest team I ever worked with at Iron Galaxy was probably in the 60 to 70 range. I feel like, if I remember correctly. Um, Here at this on this particular project, I believe the number is somewhere north of 100 plus,
Wow.
and that's not
That's
necessarily
awesome.
factoring in any external um, developers that we're engaging with to help us on
Yeah.
specific
Yeah.
endeavors. I think within this project, we have a team of producers that helps. So it's not just me by myself. And so, like, I think with me, there's like two other producers that kind of sit at the senior level. And then we have a team of APs that help um, see to the day to day of the
Okay.
team across disciplines. And so I think when I initially joined, we were in like kind of core development, and we were utilizing uh, just normal Scrum, kind of a hybrid of Scrum and Waterfall where
Hmm.
it was needed. We'd have daily stand ups, we would have weekly to bi weekly check ins, and just having decision points between the directors. Check-ins with the APs to assess risk, and
Hmm.
I think as we evolved throughout the process, we kind of moved more into like pod structures
Okay.
of trying to like centralize multidisciplinary teams for features,
Hmm.
and making sure that the connective tissue between those was the producers and the feature owners, making sure that they're communicating across different features to make sure that they got the support that was needed,
Right.
and then checking with the directors to present their work every week to see like, hey, do you have any feedback, is this meeting the direction that you've given us, and adjusting as needed.
Right. Almost like your demo day within your pods, right? Or your kind of like your mini
Yeah.
retros, your chance to kind of catch up with everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So Melissa, so tell us a little bit about Lightforge, and I'm curious about the differences that you've seen from going from where you were at Iron Galaxy, and that relationship with partners and being work for hire. And then, admittedly, I don't know as much about Lightforge. Like, I followed along the press releases and stuff, but I don't know is it fully independent, et cetera. So I would love to hear about your learnings and what you've been able to grow into going from Iron Galaxy over to Lightforge.
Yeah, I think by contrast to Red Storm living under the Ubisoft umbrella, I think I went in the opposite direction. Lightforge is a VC funded independent studio. So we don't have a publisher at the moment.
Right.
We're a 30-esque person team, somewhere
Oh,
in
that's
there. We
awesome.
kind of fluctuate in that space, but
Yeah.
we're really tiny. And when I started, we were generally using like KPIs,
Okay.
key performance indicators is like our unit of measure, and doing all our task tracking in Notion and using like their rich database structures in there to keep track of things. And so when I came on board, we looked a lot more at like agile philosophies, and we said we wanted to make sure that we could prioritize a working build over documentation. We're going to put people over processes. We're just thinking about agile philosophy and then moving in Scrum. So we moved out of task tracking in Notion into Jira. We added daily stand-ups. We talked about what our sprint cycles would be like. We put the sprint cycles within milestone structures. We added something in between those milestone structures called stages, so that we weren't doing Scrum rituals like retrospectives at the end of every 2-week sprint. We were doing that on a monthly cadence instead.
Sure. That's awesome.
Due to the feedback we were getting from the teams of like what felt right for them. So always, there's a lot of tools in your Scrum toolkit, but checking in to see what works best for the team so that we are fitting processes to work for them as opposed to making people fit into, usually what seems to be the rigid squares of a process.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, we've even now, and because things are so small and we are not really beholden to any sort of structures, we've kind of done the gamut of things. Like there are some teams now, like the engineering team at the moment is completely Kanban, and
Okay.
that's how they like to operate. We have organized our team structures around pods and strike teams. We have, at the moment, we are departmental based, and we kind of do that based on like what the big needs are each milestone. Like this milestone is really focused on demo deliveries, and so it really, and looking at the future work that we were doing, a lot of it was really department based. And so we're like, let's structure this by departments instead, versus a milestone ago where a lot of the features we were working on really required or focused around those features, and they were really
Mm-hmm.
interdisciplinary. So we used a pod structure instead.
Yeah.
So we have the room and space to be flexible and pretty frequently based on the project needs.
That's awesome. How big is the production team? Since it's like a 30-person studio, are you the production team holding the
I would cry if it's less than there are 4 of us, and then an executive producer that kind of has that hat on in addition to being our COO as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So how I love hearing that you can kind of iterate through what the team needs, what the people need. I totally agree with people over process and just trying to have some type of framework for doing things, but then evolving it. So how has that been? How's that transition been for you, and how has that worked for the teams? Has there been any kind of I could go in a million different directions because I'm always curious on like day one you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, you're in Notion and the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do, but you also need to be careful about what you want to do on day one. So kind of curious on like how you got in there and how you started to kind of like guide the team and how that kind of what does that ownership look like for you?
Yeah, I think some of the best parts about working at work for hire studios or folks or studios that focus so much on co-development is that you are working with so many different types of like studios. So you got to
Yeah.
see different types of processes and the ways in which you can slice the game development cake. And you were doing that pretty frequently. And so
Hmm.
one process that we're using on one project is not going to be the same process that you were using on a different project, even though maybe they were in the same genre or you were working with the same studio, because it's a different team and like the nuances of what you're working on required that you needed different processes. And so
Absolutely.
I think the the I think just the framing of flexibility that, the best practice that you had for your last project isn't going to apply here, I think set me or put me in a good foundational place for this studio. Um,
Yeah.
it allowed me to observe first and foremost, and just because I've never worked for a tiny VC funded startup before. So what are the
Yeah.
nuances and differences for this project? So let me just observe. Okay, how are KPIs working for us? That's not something I've seen traditionally before, but maybe that's something that works for startups. Okay, everyone here comes from Blizzards and Epics, so they're used to these other things. What was working for them in those spaces, and asking those questions with curiosity, so that when I did move things to Jira, and we had so many questions and people had so many anxieties of like, oh no, Jira is going to be a really big, cumbersome tool. Do we really need this for how tiny our team is? We got to make something that was really small. Like we only had a
Yeah.
few issue types, or the types of workflows that we were building to support those issue types were really concise. So you would have I think I removed pop-up screens at first and was like, let's let you can put any task into any place of the workflow, so you can just get used to being in Jira again. And then as folks needed more things, we could keep building on it.
Tell me a little bit about the KPIs that you use as a producer and to help drive the team. And if they are secret sauce, you can say the secret sauce too, and that's totally fine. I don't want to get you into any trouble.
No, we don't use KPIs anymore. Like I
Okay,
think
so you move totally away from the KPIs, the
yeah,
KPI approach towards your milestones and towards your planning. Okay.
absolutely. I think we have milestone themes at the beginning of each milestone, and we're also going to have so we're going to say that, in this milestone in particular, we're really focused on, X, Y, and Z, and here are the pillars for why these things are important. I think what that does from the game director's perspective is that it gives autonomy and choice to the sub leadership group. So whether that
Hmm.
happens to be product owners in a feature driven structure, or if that is directors, like department directors in a um, department organized team, it lets people at that level really kind of choose how to interpret what that means, essentially. And there's a
Right.
lot more buy-in and onus when you get to define the objectives towards those initiatives, essentially.
Yeah.
And we found a lot of success in that, essentially. Like, give us the broad strokes of what acceptance criteria, or what the player experience needs to look like at the end of this milestone, and then let those folks that are owning the product define the objectives for how to get there.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love that. I mean, and it's such a good, unique, and refreshing way, I'm sure, for you to see the difference between, and not maybe not even work for hire, but kind of like a traditional publisher, and even if it was original IP developed game where you have somebody you're more beholden to. So you're going to make a certain amount of decisions based on what the game needs, but then you're always going to have to take into account what the publisher needs, or what that other layer of stakeholder needs is, to make sure you're interpreting that somewhere in between. So that's
Yeah,
really
what
cool.
I've seen is that there's so much more flexibility in this space, that even in a traditional, like working on something like Rumbleverse or Extinction, that is an original IP and that's managed by the studio that you're working for, you still have to, like, before the project even starts, give your publisher this long list of things that you're going to do over the full development cycle. And there's very little room to say, what we're changing along the way. I know sometimes you can be like, oh, it's going to be 10 characters instead of 12 this milestone, but
Right.
like the wiggle room that you really have milestone to milestone is small. But we are we're going 180s and zigzags, and the
Yeah. Yeah.
directional course of this development is not traditional, but it is working for this
Yeah.
group.
That's wild. That's awesome. As a production team, are there kind of metrics that you have to consistently kind of follow, or are you kind of have that freedom? As you had mentioned pods earlier, you mentioned kind of structure. Do you have the, and autonomy is kind of a broad, maybe too broad of a word, but like, do you have the freedom to kind of maneuver and shape how the processes go if you want to make that change in Jira, so you put in the work differently, or you want to have this team run in a Kanban, but you want to have this team be strict waterfall because they're content. Um, how much of that kind of decision making and flexibility do you guys have on your project?
Right. So we do have a good amount of flexibility, at least on the team that I'm on. Like we have flexibility in that everything's always up for discussion. Everything is always an evolution.
Yeah, yeah,
Where we start one way doesn't mean we end up this way. But because of the size of the team, we can't it's harder to pivot when
Right.
once we have a process set, and
Yeah.
it's a whole thing. Like once we commit to something, it's like we have to roll that out to all of the like the team leads, to the directors. We have to get buy-in at various levels to make sure that everyone is understands the why of what we're doing and why we're making the change. And so it it takes a little bit longer to get those out, and it's a more of a commitment to like we may need to have like a 1 to 2 day workshop to make sure that like we're getting buy-in from the directors, and then rolling that out to the rest of the production team, make sure they
Right.
understand, and then from there rolling it out to the rest of the team and getting them situated.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a fantastic example of like that kind of change management and the power
Mhm.
of communication and the difference between or the challenges between the 30-person team where you can hop on a quick call and everybody kind of gets it and they can kind of pivot quicker to a 150 plus person team where the a simple decision can all of a sudden like totally just derail what you had wanted to do. And so, yeah, I think that's an awesome example of like how you have to manage that change. Was that a big learning curve for you in how you have to kind of
Mm.
manage and communicate change to such a broad organization?
I think it was an adjustment. I think
Yeah,
like I had done it like at Iron Galaxy, I had done it to a smaller degree, and I think this is just the challenge of scale.
you're right.
Of like we have so many more. Like the leads team is so much bigger now, and
Hmm.
like we have more stakeholders that we need to make sure are informed and have had a chance to kind of weigh in. So I think it's just like the amount of time needed and the effort required to make sure that everyone is participating and has a say, and like that due diligence, I think is was the learning curve for me.
Yeah, for sure. And how about you, Melissa? Is there, sounds like things are maybe a little bit more, forgive the word, agile, right? Within the team and the company itself. But how is like change management and handled within your company, or how do you feel about when you have to shift that process or when you are shifting from one thing to another?
I think the most difficult part is consensus, um,
Hmm.
and really wanting to ensure that there's like buy-in across the board before something's rolled out. So there's usually a proposal that like, hey, this is the change that we're expecting to make. What are your thoughts before we even roll this out?
Right.
Folks can comment on that, and it takes us a while to make a change sometimes
Hmm.
because we're trying to address concerns before we make a change. But for the most part, we'll commit to making that change and sticking it and seeing it through for at least a stage, so 2 cycles worth of sprints. And so by the time we get to a
Oh, cool.
retrospective, how was that? So at least we're not making pivots and changes so frequently. We at least have a little
Yeah.
bit of time to see it through, feel it out, live in it, and see what's really working and not working for us.
Yeah, I like that example because I think, you have to have a little bit of time to see if that thing works. If you put that in place and then you're like, all right, week one, that really sucked, or that was really amazing. Like, well, what does it look like over the course of a few sprints or a couple milestones, maybe before you actually kind of feel how the difference that change made and if it's actually something that wants to stick or not. So that's really awesome. So you both went to school for some amount of development, right? Nick
Mhm.
focusing on production, Melissa focusing on animation, then going back for game design. So, being a producer who's been in the industry for a while now, what kind of tips and tricks or insights would you have for somebody who wants to get into the wild world
Mm.
of game production?
I would say that there's so many more resources out there now than there were when I tried to get into games. It was trying to get into games was like a black box. It definitely seemed like the only way was get a job in QA or
Yeah.
QC, and then try to nudge your way out of that department into something else. And I think there's so many more resources like check out game schools. There's a lot of
Hmm.
different programs around. I think the Game Developers Conference, GDC, they have a load of free videos online and on YouTube that you could watch regarding different disciplines. So if there's anyone that's out there that's like wondering about production or art or anything like that, that's definitely one great resource.
Yeah. Awesome.
I would say that from a student perspective, that like every group project is an opportunity to practice. Every time you've got to work with other people, Like consider that as an opportunity to be a project manager. I feel like, the word producer means something different in a lot of other different types of industries, but
Totally.
really the biggest thing we're tasked to do is to manage a project. And so if you have a project with someone, like use that as an opportunity to scope out the work, estimate how long it's going to take, make processes for when you're going to meet and check in. Just practicing taking anything that feels like a big effort and breaking it down into small pieces so that you can just focus on what the next little step is for moving forward is really hard. And so take advantage of all those opportunities while you're in school.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that feedback. Any so I talk a lot about how different producers all have different kind of styles or different ways they kind of lead or manage projects, different things that they're maybe stronger at and things that they're weaker at. Not all producers are kind of cut from the same kind of cloth. What kind of if you had to say what your kind of production style or methodology is, what would you say is yours? And Melissa, we'll start with you.
Can we start by talking about the archetypes in general? I think this is really interesting
Yeah.
because it's like leadership styles were something that were coined by, I think it's Manfred Ketz de Vries in like 2005, and there's like 8 big ones, and they really haven't changed since. You can be I had to write this down. Let me find it. You can be a strategist, a change catalyst, a transactor, a builder, an innovator, a processor, a coach, or a communicator. And like those are the big buckets of like
Okay.
leadership styles
Yeah.
that you can be. I think similar to like Myers-Briggs or any sort of like personality test that kind of have been debunked of being like practical indicators of performance because they put you into a space. Something
Yeah.
like this is a little bit better because you can self-elect, right? I can say that like right now on this project, I am more of a change catalyst and a coach because I enjoy creating new organizational blueprints in places that can be messy.
Right.
And I or creating blueprints specifically that like put people first, which is like the coaching component of it.
Hmm.
I care much more about my team's happiness and sense of belonging than I do about their productivity because of known psychological studies of things like uh, broaden and build that show that when people experience positive emotions, they are going to be more productive and they're going to be more creative. So if you
Yeah.
focus on the things at the foundational level, they're going to help them create these things. You're doing it in the right order.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for doing that research. That's awesome. I'm gonna be taking some of those some of that away for sure. Nick, how about you? Do you have your homework done, Nick?
Absolutely not. In comparison, I do not. So I think like
I can send you the chart in this chat if you want to look at it.
Well,
I think
it can even be as casual as in like just the way when I've been asked like how do you manage or what's your management style or what's your communication style, like I always liken it back to being a parent, right? So like I give you kind of a sense of accountability and frameworks and a lot of empathy, and I want you to succeed, and so it's just a more of a hand wavy style than it is what Melissa was talking, which was actually awesome as well. So it can be either or. So don't feel like you have to
sure.
box yourself in too.
I think my style as it is now, because it's evolved over time, tends to generally be with asking a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So it's like very curious style, like
Yeah.
curious and sympathetic and empathetic. Like, and if I'm using like kind of like those key buzzwords, if you will.
Sure.
But that's kind of like where my style tends to lean. Like, as producers or game devs, we're all problem solvers, and we just have a different set of problems to solve. And so I approach with curiosity and empathy and sympathy because that's ultimately how you create the best connection with your team members.
Yeah.
And as a producer, that's vital to our success within our field.
Fantastic. Yeah, totally agree.
So if we're going back to like kind of the 8 archetypes, I think I'm probably in my current role, I'm probably more of like the coach and communicator with slight shades of a strategist.
I like that. I don't. Hopefully, luckily, as me doing this, I don't have to be put on the spot to tell you what I would be in that list. Oh, that's awesome! I could totally see that, though. That's really cool. As we wrap it up, we'll keep it easy. Any kind of like go-to productivity tools or things that you're into right now? I know everything's changing, and not just in sense of AI, but there's always some new thing, some new way of taking notes, some new way of informing your teams. Any kind of tools or things that you've been leaning into recently that you want to share? We'll start with you, Nick.
Yeah, I can go first. It's so I think I've leaned a lot more into. Well, I've always used OneNote just for myself. It's like kind of
Hmm.
my to-do task list, keeping notes and whatnot. I think, but coming to restaurant, we use Miro a lot more, just for that
Okay,
kind of
yeah,
collaborative white boards use. And I've seen everyone on the team use it very differently. But at the end of the day, it's just a visual way. And me being a visual person, I very much appreciate like how everyone's kind of use it to get thoughts on a board and just kind of organize things around. Um, and so I think for collaborative style wise, it's been a huge boon for the
yeah,
team.
yeah. That's awesome. Melissa, how about you?
I think this could have been the entire podcast. Yeah, this is tools are how we do our work. But yeah, I agree with Mira. I think you need different tools for different things, and Miro is such a great place for visual learners, like Nick mentioned. But for things that are like brainstorming or in the pre-production phase, if you're putting together a mood board, or even for us, like meeting modals have actually worked really well
Oh,
in Miro. Like we've done some like lean coffee structures where folks can like put up their stickies for the things that they want to talk about, and we'll move things over and we can keep track of what we did. Um, so I don't know. Miro is a great place for things that don't have to be like ephemeral and have to be noted somewhere. I felt like you were going to talk about this, Nick, of like the move from going from OneNote to Notion. I think was really big for me in moving to this space. Notion
yeah,
has, instead of using like a traditional like Confluence that comes with Jira, is going to be your wiki, but it also has calendars and notes and rich databases. So you can do kind of like Excel stuff in there. You can do task management. I would not recommend it unless your team is really small and they're all okay with it. But you can use that type of like Kanban or like board type or timeline style for different things. So
yeah.
Notion's really great. Um, we use Loom a lot. Our studio is fully remote, so we have folks in all parts of the world at different time zones, and so we often ask ourselves like, could this meeting be a video? And most of the time, it kind of has to be because most people aren't online. Sorry, my cat.
That's all
But but we lean a lot more towards like recording ourselves talking about like something new that went in the build or what a new change is or what an update is, so people can watch that on their own time. But the thing that you have to, or record meetings a lot, so for folks that couldn't make it, they can watch afterwards and still add their comments. We use Gather as like a virtual
Hmm.
office space, and at first I
right.
was
Okay,
like, I don't
that's
get it,
cool.
but now it's so cute. I help. We got ourselves like a virtual office dog, and like that dog, when you pet them, can like follow you around to meetings and stuff, and it's just really, it's cute. It's the You lessen the gap of being further away from people when you can see their little avatar sitting at a meeting table. I don't have to reach out to them, be like, to ask if they're coming to a meeting. I can see that their meeting is running late. I can just like wait or wave at them, and like I can see people being productive, and that really helps. um, what else? I think just Jira, honestly. Like, I know for the longest time we're like Jira is like a necessary evil, but I think Jira for web is like finally here. You can edit in real time, people's, you can edit like fixed version epics, estimates, priorities, assignees in the backlog without opening a new like side panel. Like, where has that been for the last decade? So needed. And then Jira's like plans, which is kind of like their timeline feature, is a real-time roadmap that pulls from Jira. So like you can actually see how
I
things
actually do
are
planning
waterfalling
now.
out.
Okay, yeah.
You can actually do planning now. And they have a new like tertiary tool called Atlas that's meant for like communicating updates, pivots, and deliveries. They can show you the team that's working on this feature, or like you can show you a team and all the features that they're working on and like updates towards it. And so I think like Jira is, I don't know, it's finally made it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to check out Gather. That sounds really cool. That's always been the challenge that I've had too with like working remote, is like, how do you still feel connected other than when it's not like a forced meeting? And I say forced as in like you set up a time or you're like pinging, you don't get that like, I'm going to walk over to your desk and say hello. You miss a lot of that from the in person. So I had checked out some tools in the past, but they were all very like just very rough around the edges. So I'd be curious to check out Gather and just see how that works, because I do think that's that is a hard part about being remote. And I love, I've been getting more into it, surprise, surprise, because I'm doing this podcast of like sending video messages or like recording quick walkthroughs instead of writing stuff down. Cause A, it's faster to say it, but B,
Hmm.
it's a little bit more personable. So I can, load up a screen sharing app, have myself in a little window and just say something really fast and get that done and just be like, here's information, consume it really fast and you can be done with it too. So that's pretty awesome. And I totally agree. I would hopefully in the future we can do part 2 because I want to dive into some very more specific information with both of you. And that's like kind of what I wanted to do with this podcast was like talk to amazing producers, see what they're doing, how they got into it, what they're excited about, what kind of challenges they face. But there's all these like really awesome threads that I pick up from even just I've only done a few, but I'm like, okay, that's really cool. I want to talk more about like mentorship, or I want to talk more about this specific tool. I want to talk more about how this remote, how you manage remote teams and what is working for you. I think it's a great way, like selfishly for me to learn, but like also that's a great way for somebody else to learn. I love the idea of having more of a production community because I think we're often all trying to solve a lot of the same problems,
Hmm.
but we're often all doing it in such different ways. And it'd be nice to have a little bit more of that openness and that connection where you can talk about like, well, hey, I'm using this tool to actually manage this process. I bet you had that same need too. I have seen not as much of that as I wish I did, but I am just on the tip of the beginning of trying to explore that. So maybe it's out there and I
Right.
haven't found it. Maybe we can help surface it. I don't know, but that's part of this discovery process. So Melissa and Nick, it's been awesome catching up with both of you today. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast. As I was saying, I want to set up some more time. So if you're willing to in the future, I'll set up some more individual time and let's dive into some more topics. I want to hear more about Nick and your move to these giant teams over at Red Storm and some of how you manage change management and all that. There's a lot to unpack there. And then Melissa, I want to hear more about your adventures at Lightforge and your kind of maneuverability and how you're able to shift things around depending on where the game team needs, and then just some of the tools and tricks and stuff that you've come across to help you manage that. There's a lot of extra fun stuff to learn. So yeah, thank you both so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Ryan.
having us on, Brian.
Yeah.
Awesome.